Season 8, Episode 20, number 327 of the Decoded Podcast. An interesting on-ramp today that I'm not prepared to talk about publicly, just because of the nature of the... How would we say this, Chris?
I think I could do it. I can put it out there. So the on-ramp kind of focused on when you know you're doing something wrong. You don't want to get caught for it, but there is a chance you could get caught for it. Now, we weren't talking about like stuff that's big time illegal or, stealing or hurting or harming. It's these small little side decisions that we kind of make sometimes just to either make our job easier, the shortcuts, but ultimately that shortcut, though it really is helpful, the cost could be discipline. It could be admonishment. It could be a letter in your file. So I think that's, I know in any business, these moments happen. I remember back in hospitality, running kitchens, these moments happen. I think that when they happen, where you sort of are weighing the outcome, the odds, thinking about it from the odds. What I like about this conversation is less about weighing the odds. It's more about the fact how in some cases, we've stopped weighing the odds. We just kind of operate in a way that has forgotten that there are rules that kind of govern our work. I'll use my own example that, I have somebody that asked me to cover their class across the hallway, and I told them no. And they looked at me like, what the hell? Like I had really insulted them and hurt them. I couldn't see into their class. I was currently in my class. I couldn't provide to my brain what OCT is telling me I have to be able to provide, which is that absolute fiduciary kind of parental coverage of my own class and theirs at the same time. I can't be in two places at one time. The individual wanted to go do photocopying, grab something from the mailroom, something like that. And I said, no. I told them flat out, you should ask admin to come and cover your class. And I could see that was not, from the look on their face, they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. So it's kind of like that. Now that's a very broad and kind of ranging example, but I do know that every day educators make these small little decisions, path one or path two, least resistance, most resistance. And in some cases, those decisions they're not supported by our collective agreement. They're not supported by OCT. They're not supported by the boards we work for, but the shortcuts that we take that could get us into trouble. And again, not big, bad, bold, blue pages for the OCT we're talking, but definitely where you'd have the sit down and you'd have to say, yep, I did that.
Thanks for explaining that. Gary's with us. Good morning, Gary.
I don't think we've ever talked about getting into trouble on the pod. Coming up in 10 years, we've never really had that as a topic. Like, what's that like, getting into trouble? I think we actively have talked about when we're pushing into the system to create trouble, but it's kind of like on behalf of some systemic thing we disagree with, or a process that we're just like, no, this cage needs to be rattled. But I don't think you and I have ever openly on the pod talked about, you or I getting into trouble where we get called to the principal's office. Yeah.
And we're going to say good morning to Rochelle.
Good morning, Michelle. I don't know if I've ever heard any podcast, and I've stopped listening to a lot of EDU podcasts. Me spewing my own words on this one is enough. But I don't remember any pod kind of like focusing on that. This sort of like, what's it like getting into trouble? What's it like being disciplined? How do you recover from that discipline moment where sometimes it's shock and awe that the system, that you're actually caught. Oh my God, I'm caught. I've been sitting beside the person because I did branch presidency for a few years. So, be called into a disciplinary conversation in the admin's office. And I was there to provide support to the member, and sitting there and thinking to myself, man, you're so caught right now. You're so caught. And then just kind of like, I knew what my protocol was, but then there was an element of me just watching that person navigate that moment. Do you own it? Do you avoid? I mean, my primary advice is wait for the direct question. Don't fall into the trap of talking too much. Teachers love to talk too much. Look at us. We're on a podcast. We talk too much. But in that moment when we're nervous, right? Yeah, get into trouble. Rochelle, you ever been called to the principal's office?
What about Gary? Gary, have you ever been called to
Gary,
the
you been called to
principal's
the principal's
office?
office? This is like our, it's like our black book of conversation, right? This kind of goes into very much like that. The stuff that doesn't get kind of openly talked about. I always do believe, I mean, there's a lot of space for recovery. Like there are some absolutely like, because there's kind of like school, the layers of rules. There's board rules, there's school rules, there's health and safety rules, there's ministry rules, the WSIB, then you have Ministry of Education rules. There's so many little packets of rules, and there are some that you breach. They're kind of stacked up in more intensity, right? And there's philosophical rules, just kind of belief systems. So there's a lot of different reasons, I guess, you could be called to the principal's office. It tends to be more the big piece legal rules, like we're either breaking the collective agreement or breaking something that the ministry has said we have to do, or the breaking of the trust rules, which sometimes is like a parent called and this kind of thing happened. There's ones that are more easily recoverable and would probably just be result in a conversation versus an admonishment or a disciplinary letter or even sanctions, maybe losing your job. For me, I think for mine, I've only ever been conversations, like just where I felt like someone was asking why I did a thing, and then I was allowed really the righteousness of my answer, and I actually wasn't. So I was still in the gray zone, and admin was cautious about telling me that I'd actually done something wrong, because then it turns into a disciplinary conversation, and in that case, you have to have union representation. So I have had a couple conversations where they're like, "Yeah, so tell me a little bit about, insert idea," and I would say, "What do you mean?" And I would wait for the question as opposed to the open just blur. Yeah, getting into trouble.
That's what
Sorry.
I've learned that from you. We talk too much. That awareness that people talk too much. Um, and I think other people rely on that, especially if you're called to the principal's office. I think they're hoping that they don't have to be as direct as I know you'd expect them to be, Chris, in order for them to get any kind of response. I like
Mhm.
that. Um, and there was a school I worked at where I was called to the principal's office 3 times in 1 year, and after the first time, I caught the principal in a lie.
Mhm.
It was like, oh, you are not operating in good faith. I I had done I had done something that he asked us not to do. So
You had done the thing?
I
You
had
did the
done the
thing?
thing, yes.
Done the thing.
And then when he presented the situation, he lied.
Mm.
Yes, he lied. Um, and I was like, "You're dirty. That's dirty." Um, I was so in the middle of all this. I did not play games when I was asked, "Did you do this?" I said, "Yeah." And then he said, "Did you read my email explaining to the staff that we weren't going to do that?" And I said, "Yeah." And then he was dumbfounded. He didn't know what to say because he's like, "You're not like you read the email of me telling you guys you're not doing that, and then you did it." I'm like, "Yes." And then he goes into this story of how he knows that I did it,
Mm.
and that's where he lied. He said somebody had told him. So then when we were done the meeting, I went and I called that person and I said to them, I was just in a meeting with my principal, and he says, "You told him this." And they're like, "I don't know what you're talking about." I'm like, "No, seriously." I said, "I know what I did was wrong. I'm just I don't believe him There's something missing here. And they're like, no, Roland, I didn't even see you that day. I'm like, exactly. You don't, you were nowhere, you weren't around. And the principal actually saw me doing the thing wrong and I saw him. So we saw each other. So he could have just said, I saw you, but he didn't. He leaned on so and so was talking to me and mentioned da 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 da. And I was like, well, Roland shouldn't have been there at that time. He was instructed not to be. And I'm like, so it was interesting. I was like, oh, dude, you're dirty. That's dirty. I just told you that I know what I did was wrong and that I went against your instruction. So why would you need to tell this wild story? It was interesting. It was interesting. After that, the next time I got called was about a parent complaint about something. And when I said that none of that is true, he was ready to hammer me until I said, well, I have an EA in my room. Maybe you should speak to her and she can tell you her side of the story, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same as what I just told you, and which goes against what the parent is saying. And he's like, I'll do that. And then he called her, and then when she came back to class, I said, do you mind talking to me about what happened? And she said he was asking about this, this, and this. The parent says this, and I'm like, that's not true. Roland didn't do that. And he's like, okay, thanks. And then she was like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, the parent's accusing me of A, B, and C. I told him that never happened. He doesn't believe me. And so then I said, well, you were with us. Mm, let's get your take on it. She, you didn't do what they're saying you did. So she's like, I would have, this was interesting. She said, if you had, I would have told him. I'm like, I know. I'm not expecting you to. I was expecting, I'm like, this guy doesn't believe me no matter what I say. So I would love to have another perspective. And then if you, I was, and if I had done it, I would have told him I did it, just like I told him the first time I did it. And when I was talking to you about something else, if I did it, and again, none of this is blue page stuff. None of this is like, I don't think I would get fired because it's not that egregious and there's a process you have to follow to discipline me.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't even discipline me. Like there was no, so if he wanted to lean on the first thing, I would have been like, you can't do that. You didn't, there's no documentation. You didn't serve me any kind of letter saying that.
What's the progressive, right? It's the same thing we do for the
It's a
kids.
progressive, but if there needs to be a trail
Yes.
and I'm not aware of any trail and I'm supposed to be aware of the trail, that's part of the process. So I always called my union and just said, this is
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. Let them deal with it. But anyway, it's interesting because, yeah, you should have seen the principal's face when I said, yeah, I did it. I don't know why he had to tell this cockamamie story of how he figured it out. But I'm like, figured what out? I saw you and you saw me. I did it. And then he was like, well, why'd you do it? And I said, it was a momentary thing. It just, again, it wasn't anything. Nobody was harmed or anything. It was just instructions. Do not take your class to this event when this event is happening outside of the building. And what ended up happening was in the moment, it just fit. We were like walking down the hall. We could hear the event. And I'm like, let's just step out here and take a look. And when I stepped out of the building to take a look, he was across the street with the intermediate students who were allowed to be part of the event. And I saw him and he saw me. And it's not like I jumped for the bushes or anything. It was just like, okay,
That'd be
he's
awesome. That'd
he's with
actually
the
be pretty awesome. You're like,
he's with the kids and I'm with my kids. The door's open. We're outside observing. We observed, I don't know, a couple of minutes, then we went back in, but we were told we weren't permitted to do so.
right.
And then he said that the person in the building next door said that they they saw me and we had an interaction, and then they shared that interaction with him, which led
Hmm.
him to wonder why I was out when I should have been in. So I called that person. I'm like, did you talk to did did we interact in those 2 minutes? And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, well, the principal seems to think in the 2 to 5 minutes that I was outside with my kids, you and I interacted
Mhm.
while this event was happening. And they were like, are you nuts, Roland? Like, you sound like you lost your mind. I don't know where you were on that day. I was nowhere in the vicinity of where he's saying I was. I'm like, well, this is what the principal told me. And they're like, Roland, I've not spoken to your principal and I didn't see you that day. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, awesome, thank you. Because I think it may have come up later that I said I talked to so and so, and I think the principal was upset. Well, why would you do that? Well, I thought rightly so I should apologize for involving so and so in this situation.
Mhm.
This is an awkward situation for someone to be in the middle of the two of us, me not following your instructions, you calling me in. He This guy, again, I'm like, you're dirty and I know you're dirty, and from this point on I'm going to operate like you operate, which is dangerous. And I kind of paid, well, looking back at that time I would say I paid for it. Looking forward, I didn't pay for shit. All I was doing was building my container and getting myself ready to be a good human that I am today. That's all I
Well
was doing,
said.
right? So it's all good.
Yep.
Gary's probably salivating on the other end, like, tell me, tell me, tell me. I'd love to tell you, Gary. Before I be quiet, Rochelle has never been called to the principal's office. I'm not
Never, eh?
surprised. No, Rochelle, she operates, man. She does what she is instructed to do.
So even when that being true, sometimes you can still find yourself in that moment of being caught. Now, the principal's office is just the big, bold kind of version of it, right? And that's a trick. Whether you're in education or you're the parent or you're the kid, I mean, that's hardwired into us. I got called to the principal's office today. That statement works. Um, is probably as powerful as the parental version of I got a call from the principal's office today. Like it's all in that same, oh, the power of the system, reached out, right? I think it's cool that, that's true for Rochelle. I think there's I think in the work that we do, there is something also good to being called to the principal's office. Like there are times where I've been in conversations. So when, the feeling of being called to the principal's office is just being called to account. I think that's really what we're talking about on a low level here, called to account, to actually walk somebody through your decision making. I would say probably on the daily, I'm not called to account as often as I would like to be. I would like to be able to be called to account and sort of speak to why I make the decisions I do. The best time that I have in that particular conversation is whenever I have a student teacher or volunteer and they are naive and open and green enough to say, what were you doing there? But why did you do that? I was thinking that this is how it should have played out, but you went a totally different route. What was going on there? And so you're called to account. Really, I'm accounting for in that sort of that behavioral ledger. Why did I sort of make these decisions, right? And I like doing that because I would say for the most part, I operate in a way that in high level of creativity and I would say reasonable risk taking in education. And I try and push myself and my students to kind of exist in that space too, because I feel like kind of cool stuff can happen. So the whole being called to account, I think there is a beneficial element to it where we do have to speak to our practice and our pedagogy. I think, our 8 years of podcasting is also an extended version of being called to account. We have become more transparent in how we talk about the cast. We've become more, I would say, less guarded in what we do talk about. I always go back to this moment way back in the day when I was still doing Chasing Squirrels, and a principal came out to me and said, like, are we allowed to talk about this stuff? I'm like, what are you talking about? And I don't think they were like early warning system of like, Clough, you're doing something illegal. I think they were genuinely wrestling with this idea that we would talk about education outside of education. And I've always found that, I've always found that very few of my parents ever listen to my podcast. Some of them do find it, but whenever they do, I love it because they ask me questions about, they're like, yeah, like, how did you and Shids meet? Like, how did you come across that topic? I listened to 4 episodes and it's just, you just seem like you can kind of like string together one topic after. I'm like, well, that's us being called to account for what we've done. And I think even though whatever 95% of this is just because you and I enjoy talking about the stuff that we do, I think there is a part of this that we believe that we're actually making education a little bit better, just a little bit better in calling it to account as well in these topics that some people, because that's the reciprocity there. You get called to explain why you've made a decision in your classroom. Let's say it's not, one of these OCT pages things. There's a reciprocal relationship there. And I've always said I have high expectations of management, who tends to be the group, the system that calls you in to have a conversation. I will always lean into them and say, let's talk about what the alternatives are. Let's talk about how you can contribute to this. Let's also talk about the resources that are missing, or, let's sort of make this like 360 degrees, like spherical. So it's not just a decision that I made linear fashion. Let's talk about how multimodal it is. So I love this. Getting called to the principal's office.
And it's interesting how, I'm sure the principal gets roped into all kinds of things that they would prefer not to be because they are the principal, right?
Yes.
Like, I'm calling the principal, or a funny thing, actually, um, I am finding that in the work I'm doing, and because I'm reaching out to parents often, many times I get messages or phone calls. People aren't calling the principal. They're like, well, we know we can talk to the Roland guy because he's
Mhm.
reached out to us. So we have his phone number, we have his email. We know that we're probably going to get to him a lot easier than the principal. And so I get messages and phone calls of people saying, like, this is what I need. Can you help me?
Mhm.
And some of those things, like, some of those requests make me nervous because I see like, oh, I have no role here based on what it is that you're looking for.
Mhm.
I have no role. Like, I don't understand. So I respond to the person and I tell them, I cannot help you directly, but I think that if you talk to this person, they can better direct you than I can at this moment.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know how much I like that. I don't think I like people reaching out to me and asking for things. Um, and it's hilarious too. You should see some of the messages I get are not. They're like, "You will do this for me." Like, you will, Johnny doesn't like what he chose for his courses for next year. You will change them to this. And I politely respond, say, oh, I'm sorry. I work in special education. I don't deal with course placement. That's guidance. And this is Johnny's guidance counselor who I've included in the email. Please reach out to them. They can direct you. I never say they'll do it. I'm like, they'll
Mhm.
direct you on how this process works. You will do this. You will do that. I'm like, holy shit. Is my mom behind me somewhere? Like, I will? Okay. Anyway, any
I,
final words, Chris, before we head out?
no, I like this. I like this conversation. This is cool. It's I think that there's this professional expectation always um that in order for education to be good, it has to exist along very clear, cogent, focused rules, laws, expectations. My experience is that often, often navigating, so as singularities, and again, we have multiple factions that govern what we do. We have regular law, right? Civil law, like that kind of thing, like the laws of the land. Then we have the laws of OCT, then we have the laws of our union, and then for you, you probably have you might not call them laws, but there's the expectations or lines that shall not be crossed because of the Catholic mindset, and then Ministry of Education. So there's lots of different spaces. Those are all siloed laws. And us as humans in the system, then we're left to say, okay, what happens when we step outside one silo and bear the distance in order to make it to the next silo? So we have sort of like this safety zone of always operating within what would be considered, I'll put in air quotes, like legal boundaries. And again, I'm not talking about where we are intentionally doing harm, like we know we're doing a bad thing, we just hope we're not caught. I'm saying that sometimes those transitional spaces, there's nothing for us to use. We just have to kind of like open the door, take a peek, bolt across, and jump into the next silo, and then whew, we made it. And hope that we're either not noticed, hurt, embarrassed, admonished in that sort of transitional space in between. How educators do that, I have noticed for the most part, it's guided by compassion, responsibility, being the parent, when the real parent's not there. Like they're guided by the good stuff, but it doesn't come without risk. Now, those risks, the conversation about the risk and what you actually learn about the system, I have always been the guy that wants to know where the fence lines are, know exactly how close I can get to them, and know what happens if I dare to just kind of like peek over and say, what could happen? Like I like to have that information. So I think moving into this next week, just before March break, we are in course selection mode. I'm getting stuff going on with student council. I'm in a lot of these spaces that need very technical decision making about it. I think over the next week, I'm just going to start to watch where I'm the sole navigator of that. Do I have other people that I know I can ask about how to do this thing? Because often when there is a gray zone, you will get from someone who you think should know. They'll say, well, I would advise you to do such and such. So you actually don't get any clarity. You're still left, even when you ask, in the gray zone and having to make that decision that this could turn out with me back in the chair here, going from conversation to actual discipline. So, and again, not where you're actually specifically harming, hurtful, doing something illegal, but just where one of those factions say you did the wrong thing here. Yeah. Let's go get into trouble. Let's get in trouble, kids. Let's get in trouble.
This was season 8, episode 20, number 327 of the Decoded Podcast. Have a good one.
You too, bro. Ciao.